Yale Podcast Network.
Welcome to the Quadcast, a Yale Divinity School podcast. In our first episode of this season, graduate student Emily Judd and Yale Divinity School Professor Harold Attridge discuss challenges in the field of biblical studies. Professor Attridge served as Dean of Yale Divinity School for 10 years and was General Editor for the HarperCollins Study Bible. In this episode of the Quadcast, Professor Attridge discusses how to deal with biblical verses that seem to condone slavery, anti-Semitism, or sexism.
It's quite appropriate to call our Christian brothers and sisters who put the Bible together to the table and say, no, you wouldn't say that now, would you, Paul? Or would you, Matthew?
Professor Attridge also weighs in on what it is like for a biblical scholar to transition from teaching the Bible in a classroom to listening to a homily in church.
But I'm often asked by priests who know that I'm in the audience, what do you think of that? And, would you do something differently? And we have interesting conversations.
And Professor Attridge also recounts his first experience of Yale Divinity School.
When I first arrived, the place was falling down around our ears, the roofs were leaking, and shutters were hanging off the windows. In the 21 years that I've been here, there's been a good deal of continuity and also a good deal of change. The physical plant, of course, has been totally renovated.
Welcome, Professor Attridge, to the Quadcast.
Nice to be here. Thank you, Emily.
Now, one book that I have on my shelf is the HarperCollins Study Bible, which we use here at Yale Divinity School, and I love it because it gives great introductions, provides context at the bottom of each page, and you edited that. How long was that process of editing the Bible? Because your version is about 2,300 pages.
Right. Well, let me be clear on this. I edited the revised version of that. The first version of it was edited by another colleague here at Yale, Wayne Meeks. And what's being edited there is the introductions and notes, not the text. The text is the text of the new Revised Standard Version. So the HarperCollins Study Bible, like other study Bibles, was put together by a group of scholars, in this case under the auspices of the Society of Biblical Literature, and working with the publisher. And what happens in the creation of a collection like this is that there's an editorial team that gets together under a general editor, and they identify individual scholars who can comment on individual books. And then they do the introductions, and then all of that stuff is funneled through the core editorial team, and then eventually sent to the publisher. So when I get into the process, it was to do a revised version of what an earlier scholarly team had done. So it wasn't starting from scratch, it was standing on the shoulders of many learned people, as we all do in this discipline. It's a big book, but when you think about the fact that it's a team effort, it's not quite as daunting.
Is it a year-long process?
It took a couple of years, yeah. 2 or 3 years, I think, on that case.
Were there any challenging decisions that you made in the process?
Well, yes and no. There were some decisions about who was going to do the editorial work on particular books. But in terms of the difficulties of interpreting the text, no, we had instructions for the authors of the notes and the introductions that they were to give a fair and balanced account of the scholarly consensus and to indicate where there were controversial issues that had to be highlighted.
You're a biblical scholar and a practicing Catholic. Have you ever had a moment when you were sitting in a Mass hearing a homily that was incorrect?
I'm not sure I would characterize homilies as incorrect. Yes, you're correct. I am a Roman Catholic, and I do go to Mass on a regular basis, and I do listen to homilies and often have conversations with the homilist after Mass. I'm probably a little more circumspect in my comments now than I was when I was a fresh young scholar. But I think the study of Scripture has become the scholarly study of Scripture has become more deeply ingrained into Catholic education for clerics than it was, let's say, 50 years ago. That was certainly one of the calls to arms of the Second Vatican Council to get more serious about scriptural study. And there's an interesting history behind the Catholic hierarchy and its approach to biblical study. But these days, it's certainly taken seriously, and people try, I think, to be responsible in dealing with the scriptural text. So I'm seldom in the position of getting up and shouting, "Oh, you didn't understand a thing," but I'm often asked by priests who know that I'm in the audience, "What do you think of that?" And would you do something differently? And we have interesting conversations. So,
do you separate your study of Christianity from your practice of it?
No, I think. Well, yes and no. I think my study of Christian origins, of the Christian scriptures, and the history of Christian interpretation has probably informed and sharpened my understanding of Christian Catholic practice today. And I think my engagement with an ecumenical community of Christian scholars and practitioners and an interfaith community of religious people has shaped my understanding and approach to certain critical biblical questions. So there's a kind of dialectical process that's gone on. I certainly don't try to totally separate my reading of Scripture and as a faithful Catholic and or attempted faithful Catholic, and my scholarly activity. But as I say, it's a dialectical thing.
So was there ever a moment where you learned something that tested your faith?
I don't think there was ever something that, as a scholar, that forced me to, profoundly rethink my faith. In part because Catholics, I think, in general, have a focus of their piety and their commitment to the Christian way that centers on the liturgical life of the Church and the Eucharist, and not on the Bible. That's traditionally been the case, and even in the post-Vatican II era, when the Bible has loomed larger in Catholic thought and practice, the Eucharist still remains the core of Catholic experience. So I've often seen in students who come from a very traditional Protestant environment and see critical scholarship for the first time, they can be shaken by it. But that never really was the experience for me. Critical scholarship about ancient texts was something that I grew up with as a student of the classics, and seeing it applied to the New Testament didn't affect my faith in any profound way. It matured my faith, I suppose, is one way of saying it.
Now, you are skilled in many different languages. You are teaching a class this semester, Gnostic texts, I believe, and they're written in Coptic.
Right.
There is a language barrier for most people reading the Bible, as most of us are reading the English translation. Do you get more out of reading the text in Latin, Greek, Hebrew, and Aramaic, the languages that most of the texts were written in?
Yes, I think it's I think it's a very illuminating experience to encounter the text in their original language, and to see some of the difficulties in translation. And it opens up a different perspective on a biblical text than just taking what you have in English. Important points can be made with linguistic plays that are difficult to reproduce in English. So both Paul and Hebrews talk about the New Covenant or New Testament. We use that language without thinking about the relationship between covenant and testament. It's the same word in Greek, but a testament has notions of inheritance, and a covenant does not. Covenant is basically an agreement, a contract. But the same word can be used in the same word covers both ranges of meaning in Greek. And the play between those two different social circumstances, a contract and an inheritance, are things that both Paul and the Epistle of Hebrews play with. So you miss this if you don't see what's going on in the original language.
So if there are words in the Bible that we won't understand the meanings should those words be left out? Should they be omitted?
No, certainly not. No, that's what you have, things like the Harper Study Bible or commentaries. I mean, one of the things in the Harper Study Bible is you have notes at the bottom of the page that point out what's going on with the original language at certain points, and that's good to know.
Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking in particular in the Gospel of John when at the scene of the crucifixion of Jesus, and he says that the line about the Jewish people at the time, and that's been taken and
that's
interpreted.
actually in the Gospel of Matthew.
Gospel of Matthew, sorry.
John has other problems.
But that has caused so many misinterpretations and issues. Would it have just been better just to have omitted it altogether? Or, I mean, I guess you, like you said, add the context to let people know it's...
Okay, so that's a little bit different an issue from the issue of going to the original language and seeing what the words mean or how people are playing with words. There are some things in our now recognized sacred text that we take umbrage at for various reasons. And the passage in the Gospel of Matthew that where the Jewish crowds say to Pilate, "Let his blood be on our heads and the heads of our children," has obviously been used in very deleterious ways in the history of Christian anti-Semitism. There are other biblical texts that have had similar negative consequences for human beings. Wives, be subject to your husbands, and why women be silent in church. Not sorts of things we want to enforce today, at least not in any of the communities that I'm associated with. Or slaves, be obedient to your masters, etc. So there are certain social values, there are certain social tensions that are reflected in our biblical texts, and I think we have to take an appropriately critical stance toward them.
But not omit them.
Could we simply drop all of that stuff that we don't like from our biblical text? Well, some communities or traditions do that in effect by not reading those things in sacred assembly. But they're still there, and people who encounter the scriptures are going to encounter them, and they need to be addressed in a critical way. I think we have to recognize that scriptures are, whatever our theory of inspiration might be, they are written by human beings, and human beings come with their faults and prejudices and negative attitudes of various sorts, and presuppositions that we now think are quite outmoded and based on a misperception of the fundamental realities of who we are. And so it's quite appropriate to call our Christian brothers and sisters who put the Bible together to the table and say, "No, you wouldn't say that now, would you, Paul? Or would you, Matthew?" I think on the Matthean line, what Matthew was trying to do in that rather horrific verse is to give an explanation along the lines of Deuteronomic theology that we get in the Old Testament for the destruction of Jerusalem in 70, and saying that, look, Jesus was, as we believe, the Messiah, and his Jewish brothers and sisters rejected him, and they called upon themselves the judgment of God. That whole line of reasoning, I think we could engage in a kind of critique of, but that's what he was trying to do. I don't think he was trying to set up a kind of anti-Semitic propaganda machine, although that's the way the text has often been used.
Mm-hmm. And moving on to your personal experience, you came to YDS in 1997 in the role of professor before serving as dean from 2002 to 2012, and then returning to your current role as Sterling Professor of Divinity. What is the most significant change that you have seen at YDS?
In the 21 years that I've been here, there's been a good deal of continuity and also a good deal of change. The physical plant, of course, has been totally renovated. And when I first arrived, the place was falling down around our ears. The roofs were leaking and shutters were hanging off the windows, so it was a mess. But the decision had been made to renovate the place, and so that's why I came. the continuity, another very important part of our life here is the quality of the faculty, and that has remained strong, if not been enhanced in the time that I've been here. The breadth of what we cover probably has expanded some.
In terms of other religions?
In terms of other religions, we are probably distinct between some of our peers in the business of theological education and being so firmly and publicly committed to Christianity as the core of what we're up to. So we are probably more ecumenical and now a little more interfaith than we have been in the past. But we're not at the point where an institution like Harvard is with its approach to comparative religion. So that has changed. Our horizons have broadened some. We've, I think, given more attention to some of the practical theological disciplines and to things like Christian spirituality. We made an appointment of someone in that area for the first time, 8 years ago?
Sister Janet
Ruffing, yeah. So the curriculum has expanded. There's been a shift in the student body in the course of the time that I've been here. There were more students in the MDiv program, a larger proportion of the student body in the MDiv program than is the case now. Right now, we're probably about 50% of the student body in the MDiv. It was probably more like 60, 65 when I first came.
And so MDiv is obviously more slanted towards people who want to pursue ministry and
right.
The
MAR. Professional service to the church as opposed to some sort of academic or educational project that you get.
So the academic interested students has kind of balanced it out?
Has grown, but so too has the breadth of academic disciplines that are represented. Feminist studies, black studies, environmental studies. There are a lot more things than one could pursue as an MAR student. Mm-hmm.
And I heard a rumor that you are retiring.
The rumor is true.
Oh my gosh. What, I guess, will you miss the most? Will we be seeing you around still, hopefully?
Yes. Well, this is my last semester of formal teaching, but I'm still on the books for another 3 semesters after this, given the rules of the Yale phased retirement program. So I formally retire in June of 2020, and after that we'll still be in New Haven and we'll still show up for the parties.
You actually came to guest lecture one of my New Testament interpretation classes, and every class that I've ever heard, every lecture that I've ever heard of yours, it blows everyone away. So thank you for that. I know that we're all going to miss you after you leave. And thank you so much for joining us today.
You're quite welcome.